introduction to performance tasks and assessments, and I use those two terms interchangeably. It will present a definition of performance assessment, providing 4 principles to be used in designing performance assessments, and it will review the 4 types of performance assessments. There are 4 principles that go into designing a performance task. Each of these will seem familiar. What's different is that these are ordered to convey a process that one should use in thinking about performance task assessment design. The order of these builds thinking about performance tasks assessments in a specific way. We'll talk about each of these separately in the next few slides. Performance assessment targets skills and knowledge that matter. First, we start with the standards. English language arts, math, science, family and consumer science, art, etc. The competencies that we've written have taken the standards and clustered them under the umbrella of the competency. In looking at the standards and the competencies that we've written, we should see skills and knowledge that begin to emerge. This sets the stage for identifying what we are looking to assess. Performance assessment is assessment for and as learning. We see that the design of performance assessment has learning actually built into it. True-false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, and questions that require simple answers do not provide learning. Whereas an assessment that provides a piece of text from a period novel, a painting, and a poem from that same period, and asks the student to describe a common theme between these pieces of work, has learning embedded in the performance assessment. Performance assessment links curriculum, instruction, and assessment. The performance task brings reason and purpose to the nexus of the instruction, the curriculum, and the assessment. And finally, performance assessment is learning by doing. Performance task requires students to learn through doing. When students are taking a multiple choice test or a true-false test, they're providing information on their terminal state, where they are at that moment. A performance task or assessment is a learning tool in and of itself. While performing the assessment, students are also learning. Performance tasks usually include key statements that start with a verb that help to clarify what the learning will look like in a way that can be measured and viewed. For example, we might ask a student to acknowledge competing views or counterclaims. Or we might ask them to gather evidence from a text as part of our performance assessment. Being able to acknowledge or to gather are verbs that are measurable and can be viewed through the lens of content. Pulling these all together, our competencies provide us with groupings or clusters of skill and knowledge that matter. When we look to assess the competency of these clusters, we design the performance assessment understanding that it will be an assessment of learning, but it will also act as a vehicle for learning. This performance assessment will unite and bring purpose to our curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And the performance task will support learning by having students learn by doing. These 4 threads will run through the design process of performance tasks. When researching performance tasks or listening to people talk and share examples of performance tasks, it can become confusing as to exactly what constitutes something being called a performance task. If you're shown an example that looks like it would take a month to perform, then you think performance tasks are big projects. If you're looking at a standardized test and you look at the section called performance task and you see something that can be done in 1 hour or less, then you think that is what performance tasks are. As it turns out, there are 4 major categories of performance task, and when you put them side by side, like this example, you see that the performance tasks have an increasing depth of learning. In this chart, you see 4 main types of performance assessment and the criteria used to categorize them: constructed response, standalone, curriculum embedded, and complex project. They all have a purpose, and we'll look at each of the 4 separately. First, let's just take a look at the criteria that we use to determine which type of performance task would be best to use for what you're trying to accomplish. First, the number of performance outcomes. Does your competency include a few, or does it include a lot? Next, the level of instructional support. Some performance assessments are designed for no instructional support, and some are designed to specifically include instructional support. Next, student choice. Again, some provide little choice, and some provide a wide swath of choice for students. Range in answer or methods. Some performance tasks are focused on very specific methods being demonstrated, while others are designed for multiple answers and multiple interpretations. And finally, duration. Some performance tasks can take less than a class period, and some of them can take as long as up to a month or a semester to complete. In the following slides, we'll use this criteria to help you come to understand the different types of performance tasks. In the next 4 slides, I'll talk about each of the 4 types of performance tasks. I'll talk about them from 2 perspectives. The first is to explain what they generally look like, and the second perspective is choosing or creating the right performance task for what you're assessing. The constructed response is probably the most familiar. These are the take-home, longer response, homework types of assignments or in-class writing assignments. They have a very limited number of performance outcomes being measured. They usually don't require any or very little instructional support. The choice is limited to what is provided. The answer is usually limited by both space and time, and the duration is up to a class period in time length. An example of this type of performance task would be giving a student an article to read and asking the student to pull out information from the article to support a claim and then construct an argumentative essay. Of the 4, this is the lowest in the depth of learning. It's important to understand that while this is the lowest in the depth of learning and doesn't provide a lot of student choice, that this type of assessment provides a lot of quick feedback. Constructed response type performance task can be used as part of a larger project. They also could be part of the learning path, and they can be formative in nature. The standalone types of performance assessments are the types of questions we see on standardized assessments: SBAC, NECAP, SAT, and the AP test. Students are given the performance task, they're given the same resources, and they're provided the same amount of time. Curriculum embedded. Curriculum embedded, these are the types of performance assessments that are longer in duration. They're designed to assess multiple performance outcomes and have instructional support as part of the performance assessment. This is a project where the learning is embedded within the project, and it's expected that the students will come across challenges or unknowns as part of the learning embedded into this performance assessment. These might also include planned mini-lectures, where you bring the entire class together to provide instruction. They might just as well, though, have learning opportunities that are digital, that students can access on an as-needed basis. Curriculum-embedded performance assessments are a perfect example of the second principle of performance assessments, and that is that performance assessments are assessments for and as learning. These types of projects assess learning, but they also have incorporated in them learning themselves. Complex projects. These types of performance assignments differ from the rest in the amount of time. The duration is a very long time period, usually a capstone event for a course or a semester. It's very likely that this performance assessment actually had built into it some of the other 3 types of performance assessments as the project evolved. You see that these types of performance assessments have multiple performance outcomes with multiple opportunities for student choice and decision making and a multiple range of answers and ways of demonstrating learning. They're longer in nature and have instruction embedded into the process of assessment and learning. These types of assessments also include being able to assess things like communication, creativity, and collaboration. Reviewing, when we think about creating performance tasks, we first start with the target skills and knowledge that matters. We think about constructing the assessment as a learning tool that connects curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And the final principle is that a performance task assessment is learning by doing. For me, the 2 questions that immediately pop into my mind when I think about competency-based learning and creating performance tasks are, how many performance tasks do I need, and which of the 4 should I use? Those are 2 very difficult questions to provide a single blanket answer to in our district. Because of the variation in curriculum, we have some courses that have competencies that are year-long competencies, and some with competencies that are very time-sensitive. Some courses, because of their student contact time, have a couple of competencies, where other courses have many competencies. But I think there's an answer that can be given. First, there should be a performance task for each competency. That answers the how many question. The second question of which type needs to come from the following, the first principle of design. Determine the number of performance outcomes you have for a competency. Once you have that, then you need to determine how much time do you have for the performance assessment. Now, I want to caution here, you might need to reconsider your answer because in your current paradigm, you might always answer, we don't have any time. But in a competency-based performance assessment, with learning embedded into the performance task model, you might find that you actually have more time to allow for these longer duration performance tasks. At the conclusion of this slide set, you should have an understanding of what a performance task needs to embody in terms of the principles. You should have a resource that you can go back to in determining what types of performance tasks are needed in your particular learning environment. And finally, you should be coming to understand that in creating the performance task, you actually are changing and rethinking the pedagogical structure of your course and instruction. Thank you.